Okay, good morning. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Sorry for a couple minutes of delay with the tech. But here we are, the week of Purim, and Purim is always a busy day, a day when there's so much going on. I think over the years, each year Purim potentially could get busier and busier with so much going on in communities. It's a very highly celebrated Chag. And this year, when Purim comes out on a Friday, it makes it all the more challenging. How is it that we pack it all into one day? On a regular year, it's hard to pack everything into Purim. Kol shekei in a year like this, where Purim comes on a Friday, and there's a lot to do, and Hayom Katzar v'Hamalacha Meruba. So today's share, I would like to focus on, it's entitled Purim on a Friday, Halachic Options for a Frenzied Day. And what I'd like to do today is put forth in front of our audience a few different options of how to go about observing the day of Purim, and really to establish a plan today, over the next few days, of how we're all going to celebrate Purim. I think the Lashon Chazal say, Mishitarach be'erev Shabbos, yochel b'Shabbos. If you plan ahead, Chazal is talking really about Olam Haba, Olam Haza. If you plan ahead, you'll taste the rewards on Shabbos, which is Olam Haba. But in a practical sense, it always applies every week for Shabbos, but certainly this week, this week, when Purim comes out on Friday, we want to make sure that we observe Purim to the best of our abilities, and at the same time, keep Shabbos to the best of our abilities. The balance between the two, Purim and Shabbos, is not an easy balance to have. I know one of the wine companies always advertises their wine as perfectly balanced. Well, you might need that type of wine for this year to keep your Purim and your Shabbos perfectly balanced. Now, the night of Purim, which this year is Thursday night, that should be no different than any other year. Pashtas, right? You have Mikra Megillah after a Tainus, and that, for the most part, is your mitzvah of the night, to listen to Mikra Megillah. There might be a small inyan to be marbe, a little bit besuda, and there are some places that have mesibos, don't have mesibos, learning, COVID friendly. I hate to think COVID unfriendly, but okay, the night is not such a big deal this year. The challenge is the day of Purim. The day of Purim, we have 4 mitzvahs. There's again the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. There is the mitzvah of Matanas Levyonim, the Shlach Manos, and finally the mitzvah of Sudas Purim. All those 4 are important mitzvahs, mitzvahs D'Rabbanan, mitzvahs in Divrei Kabbalah, that one has to keep. And really, anyone knows that studies time management, you have to have your priorities. You can't do everything. We're only human. We're battling against the clock. The buzzer's going to hit. There's no overtime. We're coming to Pesach. So there too, you really have to eat afikomen. The buzzer goes off echatzos. So there we know there's a trick. There's a halachic idea of the Avnei Nezer, of how you could extend into overtime by utilizing this idea of the Avnei Nezer. There ain't no overtime for Purim, at least we'll see. Some people think there is, but there is no overtime for Purim. You have to get everything in, otherwise we'll all turn back into pumpkins. So we have to plan ahead today next few days, how we're going to have our Purim this year. Now, really strategically, the question is, where do you begin the day? A lot of times when you're scheduling something, do you schedule forward, okay, we'll start with this, and then we'll go to there, which obviously things lower down on your list you may not get to in the way you would want to. Alternatively, you could build back better. You could start from the end and work your way back. Okay, if I have to be here at this point, what happens to everything else? You know, Havdol, you have a chasana. So the chasana is starting at this time. Everything else has to be put back before that. You have to figure out how to fit in all your appointments the day of the wedding before the starting point of the wedding. The problem sometimes is when people go the other way. They start all the appointments the day of the wedding, and the wedding gets delayed, it gets schlepped, and the guests definitely don't like that one. So strategically, I think the smartest way we're going to have to plan our Purim is really backwards. The first question I think we're going to have to answer this year is, when are we having our Sudas Purim? After we answer that question, then we could see how much time there is for everything else. Why am I telling you we're starting from the Sudas Purim? Why don't we go from the beginning? Mikra Megillah, Matan Sigol, Mishloach Manos. So let me just, before we even get into the nitty-gritty of the halacha, you know, Purim, as we said, is a challenging day. Probably what makes it more challenging is the way we live life in our society. We sometimes overemphasize things which shouldn't be on the top of the totem pole. Actually, the Mishnah Berurah spells out their halacha, and I've mentioned this in the past, but it's always kedai to chazer. What are we supposed to be spending most of our money on? You can spend a lot of money on mishloach manos, depending how big your list is, how fancy your mishloach manos are. Your themed costumes are probably part of that budget. And before you know it, people are spending a lot of money on mishloach manos. Sudas Purim, you have the best meats, the best wines, the best everything. And that could also rack up a big bill. So what do you do with that? The Mishnah Berurah says the best thing you really should spending your money on is Matanas Lavyonim, is giving money to the poor. That's really where our focus should be. And in a certain sense, this year it might be even more important, because in a lot of communities, they've curtailed, they've outlawed, Bachrim, people going from house to house on Purim due to COVID. Fears, people just going around. It's probably not a good way. If chas v'shalom, there's a spreading. If a person going around collecting is going from house to house, it's unfortunately an easy way to spread things. And many communities already discourage that, or even blanketly outlaw that. So there's all the more reason. Look, you can still give tzedakah, even if that was not knocking on your door. Nowadays there are many online you could give, and many other means and ways. And really, most of that giving could be done, we'll talk about that later, but could be done before Purim, thus, for it to be given out on Purim. You can swipe your credit card today, and that will work pashtas for Purim. So as long as it's given out, you have your shech giving it out on Purim. So that works. So really, Matanas Avyonim you could do ahead of time. Mishloach Manos, the mitzvah is Mishloach Manos Ishrei, one Mishloach Manos. Okay, that's one for you. Talk maybe one for your family, each child, wife. Okay, but that's not necessarily an all-day affair of giving out to your entire community Mishloach Manos. So there is room to scale back on Mishloach Manos, especially this year, due to Purim constraints, besides even talking about COVID constraints. But the Sudas Purim, that has, as we'll soon see, very specific halachas, and therefore that's where I'm going to begin the day. The focus of the day, first question we're going to have to answer is, when are we having our Sudas Purim? After we deal with that answer, feel sufficient to know when we're going to do our Sudas Purim, then we'll plan the rest of the day around it. Now, how many options are there when to do the Sudas Purim? People have told me of this topic that I'm giving Sharon today is a very, very popular topic, and the Rabbanim, Shirim all around are discussing this. And I've heard different amount of choices. L'nias daiti, what I've seen, I've spoken to people, there seems to be three options. Okay? Not one, not two, not four, three options. And we'll go through those options in depth. Just to list them off, one option, and don't choose your option until we go through them in depth. But choice A is to do your Suda in the morning. In the morning, I mean, anytime in the morning, after you daven, after you hear Megillah, but anytime in the morning you can have breakfast, Purim Suda, really we'll talk about it before Chatzos. That's option A. Option B is to have it in the afternoon. Obviously, with Shabbos coming, the earlier the better. But it could be done, perhaps, in the afternoon. Maybe even after a person davens mincha, like probably what is the common modern day time when people have sudas in the afternoon after they daven in the early mincha. And option 3 is to do the Purim Suda to start before Shabbos and to flow into Shabbos with your Purim Suda. So your Purim Suda is going to go directly into your Shabbos Suda. Those are the three options that we're going to go through today. Now, to begin, the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tafrei Tzadi Hey, you have this, Sif Beis. I'm going to read a little bit earlier than what I put on the sheets. The Ramah writes, "U'mispal mincha tchila b'ol hayom gadol, yidav mincha first. The rova suda tzricha lios biyom. Really, your suda every year, the majority of it should still be during the daytime. The lo kamosh nagim mahaskos samuch ha'erev, the ikar suda hulel tesvav." Very important point, which unfortunately people make mistakes, especially in our, forget about this year, Purim's on Friday. On a regular year, people are so busy with the Mishloach Manos, till they sit down at their Purim Suda, sometimes a situation like that will be, sometimes a situation like that could be that you end up sitting down to a Suda and it's already past Shkia. One shouldn't do that. Really, as the Ramah writes, that you're supposed to start before Shkia, and Iker Suda, most of the Suda, the main part, you should hit the main before Shkia. That's an important halacha for every year Purim. Chosh came this year when it's a busy Friday afternoon. The Ramah writes, "Ukshechol Purim biyom shishi." This is ready on your sheets. When Purim comes out on a Friday, Yaseh hasuda b'shachris. You make the suda b'shachris. Doesn't mean at shachris for you drunk fellows. No, it means in the morning. Mishum kavod Shabbos. Because of Kavod Shabbos. So it's in the Ferish Ramah. The Ramah talks about this, that one should make a Suda in the morning. Now, let me just elaborate on this concept. Is this a special kula to make it in the morning? Look at the Ramah writes weiter. Again, it's not on the sheets. Misha if a person wants to make every year, we'll try it this year. You do an early Purim Suda. You like it. It's like a shmak day when you have the Suda in the morning. Perfect. You can do that every year. In fact, Mishabur brings down earlier from a shla that the person who makes his Suda in the morning, that's the best time to do it. The shla bases on, he assumes that Esther's Suda was in the morning, and part of our Suda is Zecher to Esther Suda. Okay? That is an idea you can do every year, not just this year. You can make the Suda in the morning. Now, the Mishabura writes, what does it mean doing the Suda in the morning? He writes, Hainu kodem chatzos hayom l'chachila. This is the Farish there on your sheets. A person should make the Suda ideally before chatzos, before midday. Can't tell you the New York time, I can look it up. But here in Florida, chatzos is a little bit after 12:30. So one cannot, according to l'chachila, according to the Mishabura, one should be making his Suda before chatzos. That's pretty early. You're going to make a Suda before chatzos. You can make a Suda 11:30, 12. Start a Suda 12 o'clock. Yeah, probably never had a Purim Suda that early in the morning. But Zakt, L'Chavetz Chaim, L'Chachila, that is one should have a Suda. I also saw that Rosh Zalman Auerbach writes this, that when Purim comes down on the Friday, the Medaktikim, those who want to be Medaktik and Halacha, will have their Suda in the morning before Chatzos. And I spoke to a posik on the topic, and everyone has their agenda. Everyone has, I want to see my Purim be like this, be like that. I brought up all the issues to the posik, and the posik, it was like, hey, you want to do things in the most ideal way? The way to do things is to have the Suda exactly the way the Mishabura writes it, based on the Ramah, that the Suda should be before Chatzos. So Chatzos is 12:30, you can start 12 o'clock, that's good. But that would be the way to do it. To start after Chatzos, after Mincha, would not be the ideal. So that is the first option, and I believe most poskim will say the ideal option. Option number 2 is a little cryptic. You saw the Ramah, it only gives one option, Shachas. You saw the Mishabura, L'Chachila Kodem Chatzos. But if you look at the Mishabura, he writes, V'ayim biyada Frayim, Ma'ashakos b'shem Ma'aril. Look in the Yad Ephraim when he quotes the Maril. The Chavetz Chaim doesn't even spell it out. He just gives you another Maramakel. Check out this Maramakel. I think that itself already is a deal. The fact that the Chavetz Chaim doesn't spell it out. The second option, which the Maril says, is one is allowed to make a Suda on Erev Shabbos of Purim, even up to the 10th hour of the day. That would also be okay. So if Chatzos is the 6th hour, practically speaking, again, these are, when we talk about hours, we're talking about Shalosh Zmanios, halachic hours, but that means you have a significant amount of time post Chatzos to start and have your Suda. I would bet that this is ipso facto will be probably what a lot of people end up doing in Klal Yisrael. Look, the Mishnah Berurah brings a Mar Malcolm to it. It is a tzad in halacha. I found Reb Chaim Kanievsky, when he summarizes this Mishnah Berurah, he quotes, this idea of the Maharil, and he clearly writes that this is b'diavad. This is not l'chachila. It's a way to do it. It's a way to do it, but not the ideal. Now, I would add one interesting psak, which I found, which is not so well known. They have quoted from Rav Moshe Feinstein. I found this in the back of the Sefer Shmaitza de Moshe. It's from a Torah journal years ago, that Rav Moshe was asked the following scenario. Look, a person could have the Sudas Purim before Chatzos, Makayim, the ideal, what the Ramah says this year, but he won't have anyone else by his Suda. His guests could only come later. So Zaktra Moshe, since the idea of the Sudas Purim, there's Mishnah Berurah himself brings, right? Quoting from the Shlah, Sheikabishan Seibesho v'chaverov the Efshel Sameach Karai b'yachid. You're not going to be able to be a Sameach properly if you're just alone. Now, I'm saying this with a caveat. This year, with Corona restrictions, I believe in Eretz Yisrael, they only allow nuclear families. So don't say that the Mishnah Berurah is, look, this is when I assume it's able to be done. And people have to be careful with social distancing. And you can't necessarily have the invite list by your Suda this year as you have every year. Okay, if you're on the same boat, you're all post-antibodies, post-vaccine, okay, good. But if the situation, people are not yet exposed and there is some danger, this is a cheshbon. But at the same time, a Purim Suda celebrated with more people, or here, let me specify the case. The case of Rav Moshe was the person being alone versus waiting and having more people. So Rav Moshe said the person could wait. I don't know, you can extrapolate. I have a Suda, I have some people. I could get more people if I make the Suda later. That's not so pashut. Rav Moshe did not talk specifically about that case. Is yesh lachalik. There's a difference. How many people do you need? People thought before COVID that I could only celebrate a wedding with 500 people. Post-COVID, we realized that, you could celebrate a wedding with just your family there. And look, so do by Purim. So there is this other idea, second option, of having the Suda up until the 10th hour of the day. So practically speaking this year, you can't have the Suda Samach once the Zman Mincha comes. And it's probably, if you're going to have it in the afternoon, it's probably Kedai daven Mincha beforehand. Because otherwise, who knows, the person will be sober to be able to daven Mincha before Shkia. So let's say here in Florida, the earliest you could daven Mincha is a little bit after 1. So easily, you could sit down to the Suda by 1:30. That was probably option 2. 1:30 Suda. Again, ideally, option 1 is l'chachila. Option 2, Chaim Kanievsky calls that b'diavad. And here comes option number 3. As I'm giving the share, I'm getting all these, Rebbe, all the yeshiva bachrim love option number 3. But sorry, guys, the yeshiva's not choosing that one. And we'll go through. It's greater kavod Shabbos. We'll get there. Option 3 is, in halachic terms, called pares mappa. Literally means spreading of a cover. What's this about? It's actually a cute tie-in to a halacha that we said last week of covering the challah, for Kiddush. But the halachas of Paris Mappa you can find in your sheets. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch or Chaim, Siman Reish Ayin Aleph, Sif Daled. Okay? The Machaber there is talking about a case of where a person started the Suda, let's assume the Heter, while still daytime on Friday afternoon. And now it's Shabbos. So I'll read the halacha in the Machaber. Again, this is Reish Ayin Aleph, Sif Daled. He says, Tzarech lahafsik, you have to stop the Suda now that it's getting dark, now it's getting nighttime and it's Shabbos. Sheparish mappa, you put a cover over the food. Umikadesh, and now you make Kiddush. That sounds like that. If you're ready with drinking wine beforehand, which will the stomach be on the Purim day. Fascinating. You'll make Kiddush without the bracha on wine. It seems from this halacha, Moshe actually proves this, that Kiddush, the gulfin you're making, is not really essential to Kiddush. You can make Kiddush without a Bari Priya gulfin. You made a Bari Priya gulfin beforehand. So you make Kiddush, you paris mappa, you make Kiddush, and then you have your Shabbos Suda. The Mishabur over there explains, what's this whole idea of covering up the food? What's the essence of it? Sheparis mappa, you spread out this cover, l'chasas hapas, to cover your bread, ad achara Kiddush, until after you recite Kiddush, v'ya'ach kach yisirenu, and then you can remove this cover. Ki heichi titzara da'asa asuda hashda dikar d'sha'abasa. This is a symbolic act to show a hefsek. There's a difference. Till now we were having a Suda for Purim, maybe for a Pidyon Aben, maybe for a bris on a Friday afternoon. But now it's going to be a Suda Shabbos. Right? So you unveil the new Suda Shabbos. And he says, even in the case of Lo Yashav Adayin Lachol, Gam Gim Dinachi, Tzach Priestess Mabba Beis HaKiddush. Okay? Now, this idea, which again is a very popular idea amongst yeshiva guys, because for them it sounds like, wow, what an exciting thing. I can have my Purim Suda straight into my Shabbos Suda. It's going to be Lebedik. What was Shlomo Karbach saying? Higher and higher. Yeah. But let me go through all the intricacies in halacha that such a third option gives you. And we'll see how simple such an idea is to pull off. So we already said step one, you have to cover the challah by Shabbos. Maybe, assuming this case, let's say you started your Suda in Florida, Shkia is what, 6:20. So let's say you start your Suda at 5 o'clock. So you start having the Suda right now for Purim, then comes Shkia time, you gotta stop. Shabbos is coming. So cover up the table, cover up the food. You go say Kabbalah Shabbos, Mamash Karbach, Kabbalah Shabbos. Then you come sit down again by the meal. You say Kiddush. Questionable when you daven Ma'ariv. Do you daven Ma'ariv before, after? If you're in the middle of a meal and you're drunk You cannot daven Shema Esrei. You can't be Omer Lefnei HaMelech. So now would not be the right time to daven Mariv. You'll have to wait till later. Okay, but Mariv is a time, is a tefillah that you could daven later. So, right, person knows after Makabel Shabbos, technically you can have the Suda Shabbos. You don't have to daven Mariv before you have the Suda Shabbos. This is actually an interesting trick. Sometimes by a person makes an early Shabbos, you daven Mincha, you Makabel Shabbos, have a Suda, and then make it to Shul for the late Mariv minyan. For the regular Shabbos minyan. You could do that. Now, we already said you don't make Hagefen in Kiddush due to the fact you already made Hagefen drinking your wine. Now, you have to be careful. Classically, people are so used to making Kiddush. They'll say, Bari Pri Hagafen. That's Bracha Vatala, Bracha Shein Tzricha, in the middle of a meal. You had wine. So, you should not make a Bari Pri Hagafen. What about Hamotzi? I also seemingly wash. You're supposed to wash for Suda. So what are you supposed to do with the Hamotzi? So it's a machlokes. The Mechaber here really brings two shitas, whether you make a Hamotzi or not. The Chafetz Chaim concludes, since it's a suffix in a bracha, we hold suffix brachas l'hakol, and you don't make a Hamotzi. So again, but you have to have Lachem Mishnah, and like every other Shabbos, and cut your challah. So again, another scenario, you get up there, Bershos, and just falls out of your mouth the bracha. No. Chafetz Chaim says, you're going to make Kiddush without Hagefen. You're going to make Hamotzi without a bracha of Hamotzi. You just cut up your challahs. Next halacha. What do you do for benching? After this whole crazy Suda, Purim, Shabbos concludes, obviously you should have special foods, dafka for Shabbos. It shouldn't just be the leftovers from your Purim Suda are for your Shabbos Suda. No. You should make special dishes for your Shabbos Suda. After those, your whole Suda is finished, now you have to bench. Okay? The level to bench is less than the level of Omer Lefnei HaMelech. What do you do for benching? What do you do? So there are some shitas that say, you're going to say it's Shabbos, you're going to say Ritzei in benching. But you also say Al Nisim, because you never benched from your Purim Suda. You'll ask, why can't I just bench, when Shkia comes? I guess Pashas, you probably shouldn't, because you're having another Suda right away. The only hefsek is a Paras Mappa, maybe a Kabbalah Shabbos. Okay, so you want to say you can bench before. So there are some that say that one could recite in that benching Al Nisim and Ritzei. But the Mishnah Berurah, however, holds, I know it's Purim, I know it's Adal Yada min Ar Haman to Baruch Mordechai, but it shouldn't be Adal Yada what today is. Is today Shabbos? Is today Purim? If you're going to be saying Ritzei for Shabbos and Al Nisim for Friday Purim, that's confusing, that's crazy, that's a stira, that's Tarti the Sasri. And therefore the Chafetz Chaim says you do not recite Al Nisim. I guess you lost your Al Nisim along the way, perhaps with other things too. So these are just some of the somewhat complicated halachas to pull off this mappa, this third version. For the record, I do know of some people that do this. So I heard from somebody that pretty good source that Rabbi Aaron Kotler did this one year when Purim came out on a Friday. Now, Purim coming out on a Friday is a very infrequent occurrence. The last time it happened here in America was 2008. It was the last time we had Purim on a Friday. Before that was just a few years earlier, I think 2005. But Lamaisa, Purim on a Friday is a very infrequent occurrence. But there were some Gedolim, some people that would do this this would be the way they observe Purim. Rabbi Shapiro just married off his daughter the other night at the Chassan. They gave out a little kuntras from the Chassan. So the Chassan said that he was in Yerushalayim in Tafshin Ayin Tes just a couple of years ago, and there in Yerushalayim it fell out that Purim was on a Friday, and he was by one of his rebbeim was very makbid and insisted on doing this third option of Matas Marpa. Okay? He also wrote there that there are strong kol kores all over Yerushalayim that one should not do option 3. Rabbosai, what do they have against option 3? So besides the complications that we said and just pulling it off halachically, there also is a good fear that if a person really is shikar from Purim into Shabbos, that Chas Hashem could lead to be Mechal Shabbos. The Chavetz Chaim himself in Hilchos Purim talks strongly about that a person has to be very careful when one's drunk, that they shouldn't reach a state where they're mevatel mitzvah and mitzvos, any mitzvos involved in Purim. So a person has to be careful with that. Kol Shekain this year, if Purim's coming out on a Shabbos, really any time a person has a Suda, depends how drunk a person is, you don't want to Chas Hashem be Mechal Shabbos. That would be the worst. And the greatest possibility of a person being Mechal Shabbos probably is if you have this Suda into Shabbos. So that's why the poskim in Eretz Yisrael are very strong, signing on this kol koreh, that one should not do this option. Really, this option is not brought. The Chavetz Chaim doesn't bring this at all in Hilchos Purim. And it's brought in Hilchos Kiddush, but it's not so pashut that this is recommended. Some people say to begin with, for sure, this is a b'diavad type idea. And there's also shilos of kavod Shabbos, so what are you going to be dressed in? You're going from your Purim Suda to Shabbos. I see many people dressed in their Purim Sudas. That's not the way I would expect a person to be dressed for Shabbos. We could declare Shnei Daven Mincha that way, but definitely not for kavod Shabbos. And thus, ideally, what we would say here is, look, there's 3 options. The Mishnah Berurah clearly brings the first option, l'chachila. He alludes to, quotes the Maramakom for the second option of doing it after Chatzos, 10 hours in the day, okay? That's another option. And the third option, this Matas Mapa, which the Mishnah Berurah doesn't talk about at all, directly over here in Hilchos Purim, is a third option, but could run into a lot of problems, and there are those that do it, and if that's your Masorah, if that's your Psak, Matov U'Manayim, but to recommend it is very hard to say, because the odds of everything working out perfectly doesn't sound so simple, and it could come to take away from Kavod Shabbos. I see somebody, this is the Harvey joke. He says, can you be Yotze all Shitas by having 3 Sudas? So, no. You got to pick one of these 3 options. So, now let's walk it back. If you picked option 3, where you're going to do your Suda 5 o'clock and roll into Shabbos, okay? What's the difference? Friday Purim from every year Purim, you have a full day. You could wake up late, hear Megillah at 10 o'clock in the morning, go give out Mishloach Manos, waltz around the whole day, and you'll roll into your Purim Suda 5 o'clock. Okay? I guess you'll have a lot of time for everything else Purim if you pick that option. Option 1, on the other hand, if you're going to try to do your Purim Suda by Chatzos, by midday, so then Pashas, that means you're having your Purim Suda at 12 o'clock in the morning, and that means you're going to have to get up quite early to daven. Nates Minyanim this year are quite popular. You daven Nates, you daven early, you hear Megillah early, you give out your Mishloach Manos early. Hopefully there's an also to learn Torah before the Suda. You learn tomorrow morning, and then you sit down 12 o'clock to the Suda. That is not going to be an easy thing to do, and I'll get to in a moment some additional ideas on how to make that happen. But Lamaisa, this idea of having a Suda, the best way to do the Suda is have it before Chatzos. It means you're going to have to hurry the first part of the day. The middle option, which I practically assume is going to be adopted by a lot of people, is, okay, a little bit in between, a compromise. You start your Suda 132, something like that. Again, the later you get, the more problematic it could be. But you start your Suda after Chatzos, after Mincha, let's say. So then you have half a day when you could wake up, daven, Mikra Megillah, and Mishloach Manos. Now, one thing I'd like to add, we already mentioned that the Ikar Mitzvah Mishloach Manos is one Mishloach Manos per person, okay? So you give, if your children give, if your wife give. But there's a very interesting Aruch HaShulchan. What happens if I send the Shlach Manos before Purim? Is that a chap? Well, you already said, look, I could swipe today my Matanas Avionim. All I am is I'm giving money to some organization, to some person, and they're going to give it out. The Matanas Avionim, the legitimate ones, all say it's to be given out on Purim. So great. I'll do it today. They're going to be my shliach. They're giving it out on Purim. I did the mitzvah. So I don't have to spend, quote unquote, time on Purim day giving out Matanas Avionim. I can do it ahead of time. Could I send out my Mishloach Manos ahead of time? Look, I'll send it all in the mail. I'll hire some guy to deliver it. What do you say? Can I give it out before Purim? Or even, can I give it out the night? I have no time the next morning. I'll go around the night of Purim putting packages by people's doors. Does that work? So I have on the bottom of the sheets the Aruch HaShulchan Tov Rei Tzadi Hey Sif Yud Zayin. Yesh Listapek Kishashalach Manos L'Re'eu Shabam Rachikim Kodem Purim. Let's say I'm sending someone further away, right? I'm sending him before Purim. V'yagil lo b'Purim, and it reaches him on Purim. Im yotze b'day idei mishloach manos. And by yotze mishloach manos, if I send it before Purim, I reach him on Purim. So yesh mishiyom adiyotze. The Ber Hativ says that one is yotze if you send it before Purim. So practically speaking, you have a child in Eretz Yisrael, you mail them Mishloach Manos, which has a guaranteed delivery date, which as long as it's not the United States Post Office, might actually be worth something. It's guaranteed it's going to be delivered on Purim. According to the first Sad, you're 100% Yotze. For Linira, the Aruch HaShulchan himself writes, the Lo Yotze. The Be'ina Mishloach Manos B'Purim Atzmo, you need to send it on Purim itself. Yo, the Ikar Mishloach Manos, having Mishum Simcha, there is a Simcha he lo atam, Mashashloch Mikodem. Part of Mishloach Manos is the Simcha you get by sending it. How are you going to get that if you did it ahead of time? And so it sounds like, according to the Aruch HaShulchan himself, that you do have to give it the Mishloach Manos on Purim day. But he does bring this Berhetiv, which says you could send it before, as long as it arrives on Purim day. So Pashtus, according to the Berhetiv, if the mitzvah Mishloach Manos is on the Yom HaPurim, right? It's done to the Suda, he made Nishta V'Simcha. So the Mishloach Manos, the mitzvah is to give out Mishloach Manos during the day. But what happens if I put it there by a person's doorstep, and the person will get it on the day of Purim? Well, I did it early in the morning. I did it late at night, the night of Purim. I send the shliach to give it. Look, if you send the shliach to give it, I can send the shliach to give it on Purim too. I can hire somebody. It might also be a way to ease your Shlach Manos. I should really tell Bachrim they should start a business. Sukkah building is a good business, and clean people's cars for Pesach. What about this year, where there's so much Mishlach Manos, people want to deliver Mishlach Manos, and sit down to a Suda for 12 o'clock. So you know what? Maybe I should have a system. You should get Bachrim, get people to deliver your Mishlach Manos for you. This way, chick-chock, it's delivered. Or hire Robert, the UPS guy, off hours, whatever it takes. Now, just one little ha'ara, which I was bothered by myself too. In Shmuel Kamenetsky's Sefer on Purim, Machaber, Daniel Asher Kleiman is troubled by this Aruch HaShulchan. He says he doesn't understand. See, if I send something before Purim and it arrives to the person before Purim, okay, then I understand you're not doing the mitzvah Mishloach Manos on Purim. He understands the Aruch HaShulchan's idea. He says, L'maisa, if you send it and it reaches the Makabel on Purim itself, why isn't that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos? Why can't I always just send it beforehand and I'll reach the person on Purim, we'll get it on Purim? So he actually leaves off Tzarech Ian on the Aruch HaShulchan. Now, I'm not sure fully the kasha, because the second reason the Aruch HaShulchan said is an element of simcha in delivering the Mishloach Manos. It's not just you're excited that the person received the Mishloach Manos. There's something, again, I don't mean necessarily that you have to be the deliverer, but of sending something on Purim is a simcha when you send it. Oh, they're going to be so happy when they see this. Oh, they're going to love my poem. I don't know if that's part of the Mishloach Manos or not. But there's a certain simcha, so maybe that simcha has to be on the day of Purim itself. But definitely there is a sheet of the Ber Heitev which says you could send it ahead of time as long as it reaches the person on Purim. So if a person is running out of time and realize again that the mitzvah Mishloach Manos is just to give to one person, so all the extra Mishloach Manos you give is, okay, extra. So maybe that people could send ahead of time this year, or the idea of having, getting people to deliver on your behalf. This way you don't have to run around so much, delivering Mishloach Manos on Purim. But either way, there are options and there are ways that we could get Purim done this year, even when Purim comes out on a Friday. Just like to end, Purim is a day which is probably one of the happiest days of the year in the Purim community, in the Torah world. And it's exciting on so many levels. The kids are excited for their Mishloach Manos, and the adults are excited for their Suda, and all different aspects. And we should be careful this year. I think it's Kedai, to balance everybody. Make sure that everyone's getting their simcha, their excitement from Purim. And, I told that story not too long ago about David Feinstein, how some father wanted to ask David Feinstein a question by a kiddush, and to him the schos, the tainug, the enjoyment of being able to talk to the greatest poskim was something overwhelming. Here he has a chance to speak to David Feinstein, and his kid's there by the kiddush, and his kid has a piece of cake, And the father schleps the kid, come, let's go! And the kid's like, I want my piece of cake. The father says, don't worry, I'll give you a different piece of cake. And Rav David stops the father in his tracks. But your child wants that piece of cake. Everyone wants their piece of cake on Purim. We have to make sure that, Be'ez Hashem, everybody gets it. And the more we plan ahead this year, before Purim hits us, the better we'll be to having really a day of Yimei Mishta V'Simcha. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful and freilich week.